Serafina Cole had never expected the king's guards to knock on her door. She was in the middle of grinding dried herbs when the two large wolves appeared at the entrance of the small healing hall where she worked every day. They did not smile. They did not explain. They simply said that Alpha King Caspian Thorn was requesting her presence in the royal chamber, and that she should come immediately. Serafina wiped her hands on her apron, took a slow breath, and followed them. She had seen the Alpha King from a distance before. Everyone in the North Ridge pack had. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved through a room the way a storm moves through open land, quietly at first, and then impossible to ignore. She had pulled an arrowhead from his side once, 3 years ago, after a border attack. He had not flinched. He had not thanked her either. He had simply stood up and walked away, and she had told herself that was fine. People like him did not need to say thank you to people like her. She reminded herself of that fact as she stepped into his war chamber. He was standing at the window when she entered, his back to her. The room was large and cold, lit by a single row of candles along the stone wall. Maps covered the table. Stacks of letters sat beside them, all sealed with red wax. He turned when he heard her footsteps. His eyes were silver gray. She had forgotten that. Or perhaps she had chosen not to remember. "You are the healer's assistant," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," she answered. He studied her for a moment, the way a person studies a map before a long journey, carefully, looking for roads that might be useful. "I need something from you," he said. "Not your healing, something else." He explained it plainly, without warmth, but also without cruelty. The Summit of Alphas was beginning in 6 days. Every pack leader on the continent would be there. Political alliances would be made and broken. Enemies would be watching for weakness. And the greatest weakness an Alpha King could show, in that particular gathering, was arriving without a Luna by his side. His true Luna, Isolde, had died 3 years ago. He did not want another real one. He had decided that long ago, and he had not changed his mind. But he needed someone willing to stand beside him for 2 weeks, play the role convincingly, speak when spoken to, and then leave quietly when it was over. Someone with enough wolf blood to pass the verification ceremony without collapsing. Someone with no family ambitions, no political connections, and no desire to stay. "Someone like you," he said. Serafina was quiet for a long moment. She looked at the candles on the wall. She thought about the healing hall and the medicine supplies that were always running low. She thought about the fever season coming in 2 months, and the children in the outer settlement who would need treatment they could not always afford. Then she looked at the contract he had placed on the table between them. The compensation was more than she would earn in 2 years, and there was something else, a formal rank elevation, mid-tier standing, enough authority that wolves in the pack would no longer be permitted to ignore her medical instructions in an emergency. She picked up the pen and signed her name. The week that followed was the strangest of her life. She was fitted for formal gowns in the North Ridge colors, deep violet and silver, and given lessons in summit etiquette by Beta Marin, the king's most trusted advisor, who was sharp and efficient, and unexpectedly kind. Marin explained which alphas were dangerous, which were merely loud, and which would test Serafina directly, just to see how she responded. "Don't look at the floor when someone challenges you," Marin said. "Look at their left ear. It gives the impression of steady eye contact, without the aggression of a direct stare. It confuses dominance." "That actually works?" Serafina asked. "Every time," Marin said, and there was something in her smile that Serafina could not quite read. She and the king practiced their public appearance together twice. Both times were awkward and quiet and precise, like two people trying to assemble something without the instructions. He stood close enough to be convincing, and far enough to make clear that this was an arrangement, not a relationship. He never touched her. She never reached for him. Except once. On the 3rd day, they were walking through the pack grounds when a small child ran full speed into the king's legs and stumbled. Serafina's hand shot out without thinking to catch the child, and in doing so, her fingers brushed against the king's arm for less than 2 seconds. She felt something, not pain, not warmth, exactly. Something older than both of those things. A presence, like a door that had been shut for a very long time, still humming faintly with what used to live behind it. She let go immediately. The child ran off, laughing. The king stood very still. "I said not to do that," he said quietly. "I know. I'm sorry." He was falling. He did not say anything else. But that night, alone in her new chamber, Serafina pressed her fingers together and wondered what she had actually felt, and whether it had been real, and whether she should have been more careful about agreeing to this. The summit was unlike anything she had ever seen. 200 wolves from every corner of the continent arrived at the Ironspire grounds over 2 days. The air was full of competing authority, careful smiles, and conversations that meant something different beneath the surface than what was being said out loud. Serafina walked in at the king's left side, the Luna's position, and felt the weight of every gaze that landed on her. She had expected to feel small. She had prepared herself for it. What she had not prepared for was a large, blunt alpha named Varro from the Eastern Territory, who approached during the first reception and looked directly past her, as though she were part of the furniture, while addressing the king. Something steady and clear rose up in her chest. She stepped forward before the king could respond, extended her hand to Varro herself, and said, very calmly, "Alpha Varro, I understand the Shale Pack is currently navigating a border question with the Coldfen territory. If it would be useful, I am familiar with the water rights language in the Second Concord. It may apply to your situation." Varro blinked. He looked at her hand. He took it. Later, after Varro had moved on, the king leaned slightly toward her and said, in a voice low enough that only she could hear, "Where did you learn about the Second Concord?" "Elder Roswin's library. I read while I grind herbs. It passes the time." He was quiet. Then, "Stop reading. You are making the rest of us look unprepared." It was, she was almost certain, the closest thing to a compliment he knew how to give. The night everything changed was the 4th night of the summit. The covenant ceremony was an ancient tradition, a gathering under the full moon where mated alpha pairs stood together and reaffirmed their bond before witnesses. Unmated alphas stood alone. Caspian had stood alone for 3 years. This year, he had Serafina. She stood beside him in the silver moonlight, surrounded by 500 wolves, wearing the violet gown and the careful composure she had been practicing all week. The ceremony required them to clasp hands and raise them together toward the moon. It was symbolic. It was supposed to mean nothing more than what it appeared to be. He took her hand, and the world came apart. She felt it before she understood it, a rush of silver light that seemed to come from inside her chest and his at the same time, meeting somewhere in the space between them and locking together with a sound she could feel more than hear, like a deep bell rung once and allowed to ring forever. The marks appeared on her collarbone and on the inside of his wrist at the same moment. Silver patterns, glowing, and then settling into permanent warmth. The moon goddess had decided. Around them, 500 wolves went completely silent. Then, one by one, they lowered themselves to their knees. Serafina looked up at the king. He was staring at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not calculation, not cold assessment, something she did not have a name for yet. "I need you to let go of my hand," she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. "I know," he said. He did not let go. They did not sleep that night. They sat on opposite sides of the meeting chamber, and the silence between them was the loudest thing Serafina had ever heard. She sat at the window. He stood at the fire. A long time passed before either of them spoke. She spoke first. "This does not change the contract." "It changes everything," he said. "Then renegotiate. But I will not be kept here simply because the moon goddess made a declaration. If I stay, it will be my choice. And right now, I do not know what I choose." She watched him absorb that. She saw something shift in his face. Not the flinch of a man being refused, but something quieter than that, something closer to relief. He told her the truth then, that she had the right to walk away from the bond. It would be difficult, and it would hurt, but it could be done. He would not hold her to something she had not agreed to. He would not pretend that a contract signed for 2 weeks gave him the right to the rest of her life. "Did you know?" she asked. "When you chose me?" A pause that lasted too long to be a simple no. "No," he said. But I think, somewhere deep down, a part of me did. The truth about his brother came out 3 days later. It was Serafina who put the pieces together. She had been reviewing intelligence reports at Marin's request, the rival group that had been quietly causing trouble along the Pack's borders for years, when she noticed a pattern that everyone who had been too close to the situation had missed. A timing detail, a name that appeared once in a supply record and once in a meeting transcript, in a way that should have been impossible unless the same person was in 2 different places at the same time. Gareth Thorne, the king's younger half-brother, trusted member of the inner circle, the person who had been quietly feeding information to their enemies for 6 years, including the night Isolde died. Serafina told Caspian herself. She did not soften it. She laid out the evidence clearly, the way she had learned to deliver difficult news to patients. Directly, because kindness without truth helps no one. The silence that followed was the longest she had ever waited inside. Then he stood and said, very quietly, he needed an hour. Take 2, she said. I will be here. He stopped at the door. Why? He asked. She thought about it for a moment. She thought about the contract, and the 2 weeks, and the way she had signed her name, and told herself it was only temporary. Because, she said, I think I finally know what I choose. He confronted Gareth before the full summit assembly. He did not rage. He did not make a spectacle of it. He simply stood before 500 witnesses and stated the evidence plainly, and then he said, the Northridge Pack was built by wolves who chose where they stood. I will not burn it down over secrets our father kept. Gareth may go, or he may stay and answer for what was done. That choice belongs to him. Gareth stayed, he answered. It was not easy to watch, and Serafina did not look away. That night, for the first time, Caspian sat beside her rather than across from her. Not close. But beside, it was a small thing that felt large. You did not have to stay for that, he said. I wanted to, she said simply. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached out and carefully placed his hand over hers. Not formally, not for an audience, just because he wanted to, and because she let him. They returned home to Northridge territory on a quiet morning, with the silver marks still warm on their skin, and a future neither of them had planned stretching out ahead. It was not a smooth transition. There were pack members who questioned Serafina's background and her standing. There were wolves who whispered that a low-ranked healer's assistant was not what the Alpha King needed. Serafina heard the whispers. She did not argue with them. She simply showed up every morning and did her work. She kept the healing hall running. She treated the fever cases when the season arrived, sat through the nights when the children were sick, and made decisions with calm authority when emergencies left no room for hesitation. Slowly, the pack did not so much accept her as begin to depend on her, which, she had learned long ago, is a more durable form of belonging than acceptance ever is. And Caspian learned, slowly and imperfectly, to talk to her. Not about policy, about the things he had been carrying alone for 3 years. The grief he had never put down, the guilt that had settled over him like a second skin after Isolde's death, the way he had locked himself so tightly inside his own discipline that he had forgotten what it felt like to simply sit in a room with another person and not be at war. She did not try to fix any of it. She listened. She asked questions when she had them. She pushed back when he was wrong, and she was right often enough that he began to look forward to it. One evening, sitting on the northern wall of the pack grounds with the sky turning gold and purple above them, he said, I am sorry for how I described you, that first day. That you had no one, that it was a qualification. She was quiet for a moment. The wind moved through the grass below them. I know you did not mean it as kindness, she said, but it made me think about whether I had made myself small on purpose, whether being invisible felt safer than being seen. And now? He asked. She looked at him, the man who had chosen her for her absence, and found, to his own great surprise, that everything she was had been the point all along. Now I think the moon goddess has very good eyesight, she said. He laughed. It was a quiet laugh, rusty from long disuse, but it was real, and it was the best thing she had heard in months. Neither of them ever spoke of the contract again. There was no need to. The 2 weeks had come and gone, and she was still there. and he had stopped calculating the distance between them, and that was the whole of it. What the moon goddess had written into their skin that night at the summit was not a cage, and it was not a punishment. It was a recognition, the kind that does not create something new, but simply reveals what was already there, waiting in the space between two people who had both decided, a long time ago, that they would survive alone. They had been right. They were both very good at surviving alone. But together was better. And every morning, when Serafina walked through the healing hall doors, and the silver mark on her collarbone caught the light, and every evening, when Caspian stood at the window and turned when he heard her footsteps, not because protocol required it, but simply because he wanted to see her face, they were both quietly, privately, entirely certain of that. The moon goddess had not made a mistake. She had simply seen what they had not yet learned to see in each other.